Hello and welcome to 11FS Spotlight. I'm Mauricio Magaldi, and in this show, we shine a spotlight on the best and the brightest in the tech and financial services industry to try and understand what gets them going, growing, and what they think the future of the industry will look like. Today's Spotlight is being recorded at Merge London, and I'm delighted to be joined by Matt Howells-Barby, CMO at Decentral Games. How are you doing today, Matt? How are you?
It's great. It's a great atmosphere here. And yeah, there's a lot of energy going on, so it's good to be talking about Web3.
Yeah, it really doesn't feel like the crypto winter when we're in these events, right?
No, it doesn't. And I've seen from a whole host of kind of different events at the moment, different vibes, different places. But yeah, it's great to see, I think, times like this, the teams that are actually building things of value are often still talking about stuff.
Absolutely. I used to say that the bear market is actually the build season. I think we're smack in the middle of that. So let's kick it off, man. Can you give us a little spiel on Decentral Games?
Yeah, sure. So the quick elevator pitch on Decentral Games is we were early adopters of the metaverse. We hold a significant amount of land inside Decentraland, one of the largest open metaverses right now. And we built, we're a GameFi project. So everything we do is focused around building exciting, interesting experiences in the metaverse. And our core game is a game that many people know and love very well, which is poker. And what we've done is introduced a Web3 element, which has taken out some of the more negative parts, which is the gambling aspect, and thrown in the great parts, which are the incentives and now new digital ownership, and just kind of augmented the game a little bit to cater towards a metaverse kind of environment.
That's interesting. And to those that are unfamiliar with the role, I mean, a CMO is now a common role in multiple industries. What does it look like in the Web3 world?
Well, I spent the best part of a decade in the software as a service world, in a public company as a VP, and then came into the wonderful world of Web3. And I will tell you, it's very different in this world. But, most of my focus really is on obviously bringing in adoption and growth into our ecosystem and just in general, the wider metaverse space. Main difference, I would say, though, in Web3, so our company is run through a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, and instead of previously where I'd be trying to get the buy-in of our board and things like that, I'm getting the buy-in of the community, and there's governance that we have to pass and have whole different levels of accountability. So it's interesting, and then you have tokens and NFTs in the mix, which complicate, but also make it a little bit more interesting as well.
So as a chief marketing officer, what's your previous experience? So you come from SaaS. So how different is it? Because it's usually more established, more stable, if you will, markets. How do they compare?
Very different. So I think when I was in previously, it was a company called HubSpot, public company, and at 5 p.m. each day, the stock markets, they close, and that's trading ceases to exist. Coming into a project where in a company where the token is being traded 24/7, it's always on. It's a lot more intense. I think also you have this other interesting element where there's anonymity inside Web3. When I joined, our director of operations, I knew him exclusively for 4 months as Spicy Prawn. You don't really get that in a public company. Slightly different.
There's a lot less degens in traditional companies, I'd say.
I would say so, yeah. So, I mean, it brings a whole different level of diversity of ideas, thought, and stuff. But it's different.
Yeah, I hear you. So, in terms of the market, right? You're in this gaming metaverse company. You're hearing a lot of fuss and a lot of buzz about metaverses and whatnot. What makes Decentral Games different from the run-of-the-mill metaverses we're seeing now?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So I think one of the things that we had as both an advantage and also a disadvantage, in all honesty, was that we were an early adopter of kind of metaverse and big landholders in metaverse prior to all of the hype. So it meant that we came in the bull cycle last year. We had a functioning product, which we almost joke is one of the biggest disadvantages when you're an NFT product. There's nothing left to hype in the future. And we saw huge adoption. Still today, Decentraland, one of the biggest open metaverse, we account for 60% of all the traffic inside Decentraland. So we have like a really strong user base and strong footing. We also, though, we came in as one of the very early adopters, early kind of like models for building out incentives, and went through a similar challenge that many GameFi projects faced in kind of tackling the token inflation kind of challenge. And we really quickly pivoted that early on into a new model while still in kind of a bit of a bull cycle, which was presenting challenges in itself. But I think for us, what we've been able to do is not just kind of survive through this transition, but we really have kind of thrived through it and kept our user base well capitalized, fortunately. And I think we're kind of in a place where we have somewhat of a commanding position in terms of at least eyeballs in the metaverse space. Now, don't get me wrong, still a huge amount of work to be done. Metaverse is still incredibly nascent. I think as far as positioning goes long term, we're in a pretty stable spot, which can't often be said for most of the
Yeah,
space right
stable is a good place to be when you're that early in an industry. And speaking of that, I mean, we know that the hype around metaverse came on the back of Facebook rebranding themselves as Meta, and they did a similar thing back when we were discussing the early days of stable coins. They brought in DM and then Libra, and then that became like, oh, well, we need to pay attention because if Facebook's doing something in that space, we must ensure that you're talking about it. And with the metaverse was pretty much the same thing. In that context, we're seeing Meta as the prominent closed metaverse, as where you're describing Decentraland and all of these blockchain-based metaverses, they are considered open metaverses. So can you give us an idea, obviously, the major differences and why one is, better than the other, if that's the analysis we can make of it?
Yeah, so I think what we look at today as an open metaverse to what ideally it's going to be in the next 3 to 5 years is going to be incredibly different. But I think if you take an open metaverse like the Sandbox or Decentraland versus, like New Horizons from Meta and many other just standalone closed metaverse projects, they're kind of comparable, right, to the Android open source operating system versus kind of the Windows closed source. The reality, I think, though, today is that, so the benefits here of an open metaverse, interoperability, it's effectively supposed to function as, like the App Store, but of Web3, except instead of being owned by big tech, it's completely open source and owned by its users. The challenge is that, like I said, metaverse is still very nascent. Adoption's still not quite there. So we're still trying to kind of like populate these like open spaces. And I think those trying to build in the space, there's still significant friction hurdles to overcome to start building, especially when ultimately there isn't an enormous user base that you're just immediately tapping into, like with building in Apple's App Store, for example. So I think like what I think we're going to start seeing with like these open metaverses versus closed metaverses, there's just tons and tons of kind of walled gardens right now. And the open metaverses are fighting with the other open metaverses to become the open metaverse. And actually what happens is, you've actually just got a ton of walled gardens that are being built. But I think there's going to be this period of consolidation as adoption hits like an inflection point, and we start to see kind of some of the killer apps really start to flourish and shed out some of the more hype-driven projects that are going to populate space. And ideally, we start to see kind of this base layer of open metaverses where the friction to building is dramatically lower, the cost of building is dramatically lower, and I think that hopefully they can exist in harmony with other closed metaverses, which makes sense sometimes, because I think some things need to be purpose-built for a specific solution.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to explore with you is, you talked about interoperability, but one of the things that we are witnessing as an emergent capability in Web3 is digital ownership, right? The assets you own on a particular universe belong to the user, not to the platform that's providing that service, which is a drastic change in center of gravity if you think about the traditional gaming industry or even in the traditional internet. We're not used to own our own data, we usually go to a platform that in fact owns our data and let us use it. And that also leads to some things that we have yet to see but are now possible, which is portability. But it's not just interoperability, but also if I take my digital asset from one metaverse to another, will that metaverse be finally able to interpret the metadata that's on that asset and have me have some use to that asset elsewhere? So that is a new construct. So how are you seeing the possibilities of new business models around, portability and ownership?
I think this is one of the most exciting areas of kind of metaverse and NFTs at large. I think it's something that I'm personally very interested in. I think it's very much intertwined with the notion of digital identity as well, because the ownership of assets, like the idea that for such a long period of time we have, and really to date, have never owned our own identity online. And when we have like fragments of things that we own, we don't really own them even when we think we do. It's like tech platforms own them largely, banks own them largely. And I think this slow kind of progression towards owning your own identity online and having these assets that also can be attributed to you. The Web3 wallet is becoming kind of the center of the universe right now. And wow, there are some big user experience hurdles that need to be overcome with that. But when you think about portability, what gets really exciting, I think gaming is a really fun space to be in right now because it's often one of the early innovators in tech and is a good leading indicator to where we're going in the future. And this is where we started to see some of this. So you see kind of concepts that would seem so far-fetched and crazy happening already. So good examples of this, I think about projects like Loot, where instead of building a game, they just built a whole wide selection of different assets and said, okay, like maybe you have like weapons or tools and things like that. And they released these completely kind of open source, people can go and own them, and then they encourage people to build games around them and experiences around from starting with the assets themselves. And it's very interesting because you see with big brands in, say, the PFP space like Bored Apes, we're kind of seeing this similar thing, right? We started with the individual asset and brand or some kind of asset, and then experiences being built from around. It's literally the opposite of how we usually do things, right? We build experiences and then some things get popular within it, but value accrual is often, and ownership is the brand that created them. So we've even ourselves done a lot of things with like the assets in our game. They can be taken to other games inside the Decentraland ecosystem, and all of a sudden, you've gone from playing poker with like this NFT wearable that your avatar's wearing, and you wander across into a new place, and you're in kind of like this, like kind of Dungeons and Dragons-esque type game, and now all of a sudden your like poker jacket has a utility in that game. It's like very, simple stuff right now, but it's becoming possible because you don't have the same kind of copyright licensing, ownership challenges. And I think we're going to see this is the beginning that's going to kind of transform into decentralized finance and other areas that apply. But yeah, the notion of ownership, I think, is central to ultimately the narrative right now and the future of where we're going with the metaverse.
I want to dig a little deeper into the portability aspect because I think this is for gamers, and I know that gamers in general have had a very stringent response to NFTs in general, and I kind of tend to understand because it's coming too much from the left field and not with the proper context. And your explanation kind of speaks to gamers, right? So you can take something you bought on a game and you can reutilize it on another game without having to go through all the the hustle of having to rebuild your history in the new game. And this is things that maybe gamers haven't tapped yet because we're not talking about that as much, or maybe because these things haven't been fleshed out and implemented in ways that they can perceive the value. So can you describe on the path forward, what does portability look like for maybe the gamers that are listening to us?
Yeah, well, I think one thing that's really important to address is, and I think there's been, generally speaking, a lot of resistance from the traditional gaming industry and players and community with NFTs. And I think honestly, rightly so, because I think the narrative has not been one that really aligns with either the core values of Web3, let alone like the value to gamers. I think too much emphasis, especially during like the big bull cycles, has ultimately been around like value accrual and just treating game assets like an investment. And it's been so much of a focus on like the financial aspect. It's kind of rubbed gamers up the wrong way because they want to play and like have a great game experience, and they probably don't want the financialization of every aspect of their life. And that has been a big narrative, and where we've seen some of this kind of go wrong. I think one of the most common kind of comparisons I hear with like why portability, why will people care about game assets, and why is it even going to make things better? See like the comparison made with like Fortnite, and it's like, well, people are paying like millions in combined for Fortnite skins. Well, they're probably not buying Fortnite skins if Fortnite doesn't exist to begin with. I think what we need in Web3 is really great games to begin with. People need to play great games, love what they're doing, and it needs to resonate with them. They care about owning the assets in these games. They want to own them. They feel like it's a part of like their digital identity, their kind of their own kind of values aligned towards them. And then, hey, when that's something that you feel, you don't want to be restricted to only utilizing those, only having those and being able to make use of it inside a walled garden, right? Like you love a fashion brand and you buy kind of a piece of clothing, you want to bring that out to the rest of the world. You don't want to be exclusively held inside one single store where you can showcase that, right? And I think this is what we're starting to open up to. It's going to take time, but I think it is going to revolutionize things. I think where ultimately we need to start winning over is the traditional game developers and the kind of the big game studios, and show that there is a viable business model in this ultimately to kind of work together, not against each other.
100%. Yeah, it's not if you build it, they will come. It's if you build a fun game, then they will come.
100%, yeah.
Love that. So we're wrapping up the show. So there's one final question. Like, if there's one thing that you want to happen to unlock the potential of metaverse and GameFi in the next 12 months, what would that be?
I think I want there to be less discussion about how a token price goes up and more discussion about how we can build really incredible experiences that are centered around all of the things we're talking about here today, about actually incentivizing interoperability, incentivizing portability. A lot of the time right now, it's the other way around because of the misdirected financial incentives that kind of plague crypto in many ways, and in particular, the more NFT space. So I think more than anything, what I want to see during this kind of bear market, and as you said, kind of like a build market, right, is more teams building things that are going to benefit and onboard regular like Web 2 kind of users into the Web 3 space and give them an exciting experience above anything else. And they shouldn't need to even understand what the term NFT means. They should have a great experience, then that will come after. So that's my big kind of feeling in all this, for sure.
Awesome, thank you. So everybody, we're coming to the end of the show. Thanks, Matt, for joining us here. Matt, where can people find more about you and everything you do online? What's the path to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Matthew Barby, or just head over to Decentral.Games and you can go have some fun in the metaverse.
Look at that, awesome. So right, that's all the time we have for today's show. Make sure you follow 11FS on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok to stay up to date with all the cool stuff we're doing. If you enjoy our show, do subscribe to the 11FS YouTube channel, where you can also catch up on all the previous episodes. So have a great week, everyone. See you next time. Stay rare, stay weird. LFG.